Hey everybody, welcome back to our next section, chunk, period, focal point. I don't know, I'm lost for words. Our next focal point in our ongoing study of many different things church through our adult class here at the church. Throughout the course of this year, as you may be aware, we've looked at some different focal points. Sometimes we've looked at biblical stories or characters. Sometimes we've been looking at general themes of seasons that we're in or specific dates or days. Sometimes we're looking at hymns. Sometimes we're looking at psalms, various things that we have zeroed in on over the course of this past, I don't know, 6-ish, 7 months. I forget. I'm losing track. Anyway, I'm blathering. Let's bring it back in. As we kick off the season of Lent, we've got a specific focus that we are going to be looking at, and a quick heads up on that front, and then we'll move into this week's actual focal point. So through the season of Lent, we are following a pre-guided, predetermined little flow in terms of biblical stories and characters that is called Broken and Beloved. This is zeroing in on different characters and their stories that experience hardships from a variety of different directions or causes, if we want to use that word. Each Sunday, as we move through the season, the adult class will be zeroing in on the character and the story from the previous Wednesday. So I'm recording this actually on Ash Wednesday, and this coming Sunday we'll be focusing in on an aspect of that, a character from that, and then each week we'll just kind of keep doing that. So each Sunday we'll take a look at the character and the story that came up the previous Wednesday. Hopefully that makes sense. This week, this time around, we are looking at the story of King David from the focal point of being broken by sin. The scripture lesson specifically is Psalm 51 in its entirety. And the reason that this is fitting is because Psalm 51 is the assigned psalm for Ash Wednesday every single year. Ash Wednesday has its specific set of readings that do not change year to year. And Psalm 51 is the assigned psalm for that. Now, a quick word on Psalm 51. It follows David's failures with two individuals known as Bathsheba and Uriah. And if you want to find that story for reference, it probably would be helpful. You can find that in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 11, 1 through chapter 12, 25. So it's about a chapter and a half and tells the story of David's encounter with Bathsheba and how that affects Uriah and Bathsheba and David and all of the above. So that is the background story that leads us to Psalm 51. So first thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to give a little overview of that story, and then I'll talk a little bit about Psalm 51, but I'm going to kind of let you guys in your exploration really unpack what you want to unpack. So first and foremost, the story of David and Bathsheba. We got to start with, who is King David? Well, King David was the second king of the United Kingdom of Israel. He followed King Saul, who was the first king, but King Saul lost favor with God and was eventually supplanted by David. Now, interestingly enough, Saul was technically David's father-in-law, so that gives some credibility to the idea of David becoming king after Saul, and specifically after the death of Saul. Bigger story than that, but that's kind of the general overview. Now, David assumed the throne of Israel approximately the year 1000 BC, so about 1,000 years before Jesus was around, give or take. That's an ish type situation. The biblical account says that he ruled for 40 years, the first 7 of which he ruled from a community or a city called Hebron, which is in the southern part of Judah. It's actually a little ways south of Jerusalem. And then he took over Jerusalem and established as the capital and reigned another 33 years in Jerusalem. As was the custom at the time, David actually had a lot of wives, like they say, like 6 or 7 at this time. Right, wrong, or otherwise, that's just the way the culture was. So as the story picks up at the beginning of 2 Samuel chapter 11, we extrapolate that David has gotten a little older and he is no longer going out to battle. He's no longer going out to lead his troops. He no longer goes out to war as he did in his younger years. Long story short, everyone else, like his armies have all gone out to do battle, and David's just kind of walking around one of the balconies of the palace. And he looks down and he sees a lady named Bathsheba who's taking a bath on her roof. Long story short, he sends people to have her brought to the palace, and he sleeps with her. Doesn't really sound like she has a whole lot of choice in the matter, but so that's kind of the story there. Now, we have multiple issues with this first step. First of all, they're not married, so this is adultery. Second of all, Bathsheba is married to a different individual, a guy named Uriah, who's actually one of the soldiers in David's army. So now David has forced her to commit adultery against her husband. So kind of the same type of thing, but like multiple levels to it. Bathsheba becomes pregnant, sends word back to David, and he panics and tries to hide what has happened by recalling Uriah, bringing Uriah home, in the thought that Uriah will go and sleep with his wife, and then everyone will think, oh, it's Uriah's baby, and that will overshadow and like basically cover up what David had done. However, multiple times Uriah refuses to go to his house. He refuses to go home, basically out of honor, because he says, all of my fellow army men are still out on the front lines. Why should I be able to go do that? So David's ruse doesn't work, and he needs to come up with something different. So David actually writes a letter to the commanders of his army, seals it, and sends it with Uriah to go to take it to the commanders. Now, this sealed letter tells the commanders, I want you to put Uriah on the front lines and then back away from him, basically abandon him so he will get killed right away. And they do this. So ironically, Uriah is carrying his own death warrant, which is lovely, and way to go, David. So now David is also, in addition to the issues with Bathsheba, he's now tried to deceive Uriah, and now he's actually conspired to murder. So way to go, David. After Uriah is killed, and he is, David then brings Bathsheba into the palace and does marry her. So at least okay. But after that, David gets called out by a prophet named Nathan, who is seemingly the heir, heir's not the right word, but the prophet successor to the previous prophet Samuel. So David gets called out by Nathan. David recognizes his many sins in this situation. He is punished because the baby actually dies. Although later Bathsheba conceives again, and the resulting baby is Solomon, who will succeed David as the next king. So that's that story. That's how things go there. Now, I want to shift over to Psalm 51 because that's actually the focal point outside of the background of what we read about David and Bathsheba. Many of the Psalms are attributed to David, including this one, whether or not he actually wrote them. But it seems like this one, maybe he did. There's definitely reason to think that's a good possibility. The opening two verses in the original Hebrew actually indicate that this is a Psalm of David when the prophet Nathan came to him after he went into Bathsheba. So the opening two verses literally indicate that this is about that situation. So good reference there. There are some themes within this short psalm. Now, the psalm's not overly long. I'm trying to think what it is, maybe 12 or 13 verses long. I don't actually know off the top of my head. But we have the theme of asking for God's mercy, the recognition of trespasses, aka confession, which is a good thing. We have the acknowledgement that God desires truth and honesty, which is also tied into the idea of confession. And then a request of pardon and a change of heart on the part of David. Now, portions of Psalm 51 are actually featured in traditional Lutheran liturgy. Now, this is something that we don't usually end up doing here at Underwood, though every once in a while when we do traditional liturgy, it's in there. But this is something that is ingrained in my brain from when I was growing up with the traditional Lutheran liturgy, and I remember doing this basically every week. Verses 10 through 12 of Psalm 51 serve as something known as the offertory prayer, aka it's a song or a chant or spoken, depending on the tradition of that particular congregation. But it's a prayer that is offered to God as the collected offering is brought forward to the altar. And you might recognize it if you are old school like I am. It's create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with your free spirit. That's one setting. There are different tunes that go with it as well, some of which I know and some of which aren't super familiar to me. But that one I remember forever and will never, ever forget it. So again, we don't actually use that very much here at Underwood, but some congregations do, and that's really cool. So that's everything I have on that front. Before I wrap this up, one real quick little look forward at next week so you kind of have an idea of what's coming up. Next Wednesday, and therefore next Sunday, we will be looking at the story of Naomi. Naomi is the mother-in-law of Ruth, who is the great-grandmother of David, I think. We will find this in the Old Testament book of Ruth, which is a short little book. Now, mainly we're going to be looking at chapter 1, but you can read the entirety of Ruth. It's only a few chapters long. It's really not very long. So that will be the focal point for a week from now. Hope you have a great discussion. Take care, everybody. We'll catch you next time.